Closing address. To deliver his final remarks, we are honored to have with us YB Datuk Seri Muhammad Rafizi bin Ramli, Malaysia's former Minister of Economy. Datuk Seri Rafizi's political journey began during his student days and was shaped by his involvement in the Reformasi movement. A qualified chartered accountant under ICAEW, he has held important roles including General Manager of 𝗨𝗏𝗧𝗏 and Chief Executive of the Selangor Economic Advisory Office. He also co-founded the National Oversight and Whistleblowers (NOW) to champion transparency. Not only that, he previously served as the chairperson of UKEC for 2 consecutive tenures, making today's event a full circle moment. Without further ado, let's welcome YB Datuk Seri Muhammad Rafizi bin Ramli, former Minister of Economy, to deliver his speech, together with our moderator, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, Saudara Vincent Tang, UKEC Chairman, UKEC Exco, Supreme Council members. Oh, you are there. Panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Cheryl asked me whether I've been to UKEC MSLS before. I've only been to 3, I think. The last major one was when I hosted the 1998. Back then it wasn't called MSLS. It was Amanat Negara. You know, there's a very posh, elitist nature of UKEC early days. It was called Amanat Negara, and it was 1998, 15 August of 1998, 2 weeks before 𝗦𝗦𝗦𝗪𝗓 was sacked. So we had, I think, 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗔 Najib first, and then 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗔 Mustafa Muhammad, and then the late Tun Daim, before 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗔 Anwar came in the afternoon to close the function. And I asked every single one of them before 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗔 Anwar, is the rumor that 𝗦𝗦𝗦𝗪𝗓 going to be sacked? Is that true? Everyone said yes, except Anwar. And then 2 weeks later, obviously, all hell break loose. So after that, I think I only appeared in MSLS once or twice, I think once. And even then, that was in 2021 during COVID. Many people didn't realize I was giving a keynote address wearing short. It was done virtually. So I don't have text today. I mean, Vincent is there. Presumably we will have a Q&A after this. So how long do you want me to speak? Okay, all right. So let's do this. I don't have a text to read. So I will judge by the room. If you are bored, I will finish within 5 minutes. If you seem interested, then I can go on until about midnight. Surprisingly, I was given a brief about what I should be talking about today. And that's how things have changed so much from the early days of UKEC. Back then, this whole MSLS, or Amanat Negara as it was known then, was an avenue for the top leaders of the country to come and give amanat. You know, what do we expect from student leaders from around the world? So we will be waiting to hear, you know, and usually you expect leaders to talk about big things and so on. Things have changed so much. 30 years on, now I'm actually told what I can speak and what I'm supposed to talk about. So I'm supposed to focus on 2 things. First, lessons on reform. You know, where are we in the nation's reform journey, so to speak? What worked, what didn't work, what could have been done better? And then obviously, because this is MSLS, there's always that part about how do you fit in as a future generation. And I'm fully aware that this is a hall packed with smart people of your generation, and your generation is much smarter than ours. I also know that every generation blames the one before. So everything that has gone wrong in this country is obviously Nick's and all this gentleman's generation's problem. But let me put the context before we go into the details. What exactly is reform? Reform is often spoken about in the last 2-3 years as if everyone understands and have the same concept and similar understanding about what exactly is reform. So anyone from the hall who would like to take the challenge and share with me your understanding of reform? When you ask the gentleman, the panelists, the Prime Minister, or our esteemed guest today, what exactly is reform? Yeah. You can still chat GPT it now. It's about 2 minutes to chat GPT.
No chat GPT from me, Dato' Sri. Reform in its most basic definition refers to the idea of change, but to change something, you would have to understand what it was at the outset. Otherwise, it would seem that you are lost in the wind, directionless, unable to progress. Yeah.
So is reform static? Because the national dilemma now, on the part of the government, is that the phasing of reform has to be managed properly, because if you go too fast, then you will have unintended consequences that spin off a series of other problems that will upset everything. So you have one view of reform, most probably from the government and government supporters, that reform is an ongoing process. It is happening, but it is not happening at the pace and speed that you want. Because if we were to do that, it will, set off everything, imbalance everything. Of course, the opposite perspective is that reform has to tick certain boxes. If you don't do political funding act, if you don't do this, if you don't ban politicians from taking appointments in statutory bodies, that's not considered reform. And therefore, regardless of what you do, this or that government has not done enough for reforms. My own understanding about reform comes from different sources and different experience. I think it's very dangerous if we have a set parameters for reform, because you can be duped by the rhetorics. You can be blindfolded by the need to show result, and along the way, it eclipses the necessity to consider the trade-offs that have to be made from the unintended consequences. If you run a company, although most organizations or private entities don't bandy around this word of reforms internally, reforms is part and parcel of any progressive organization. Is a matter of survival. My understanding of reform is it is a series of iterations that has to happen, and it forms a feedback loop. Those who learn or who've done engineering understand that everything must work with at least one form of feedback loop or another. And this is, I think, the challenge when the present government took over in November 2022. I don't think we have a unified view of reform. Different people interpret it differently, and therefore the parameters were not set very clearly. Unlike, for example, if you run a corporate organization, from the very beginning, either from your strategic vision or from your annual business plan, whatever change or reform or iterations that you have to do in order to improve the organization, this would have been spelled very clearly with very clear parameters to decide what pace do you need to adopt, whether or not you have been able to deliver the set reforms. So, and therefore, these are a few reflections that I have, having been with, people like me have been in the forefront of policy making for Pakatan Harapan since day one. I've been writing policy documents for Pakatan Rakyat then, and then Pakatan Harapan since 2009. And these are, with the benefit of hindsight, these are the things that I would have reflected more as I, fulfill my role then. First, I think any form of, any government that promises reform, and this is also a reminder to Ahli Parlimen Machang, because should you take over the government one day, you'll be facing us on the opposite bench. And we have all the experience of going through ups and downs of trying to do reform. And we can shred you to pieces if you don't get it right. So first and foremost, reform must have a set agenda. And I think, when I was young at your age, people ask, why did you join Reformasi? Why didn't, why bother? Malaysia back then was a one-party country. If you want to have public life, or if you want to be in politics, the only way was through Barisan Nasional. Why bother doing anything else? I had a different view. I don't know, Nick was conned into it along the way, so I don't know what was his reason. But power was never an intention. And I still, I'm still very much the same 21, 22 idealistic, 22-year-old idealistic person that perhaps you are now, I feel that society has to revolve beyond one success model. I do not like the idea that I have to follow what other people tell me. If I think that it doesn't make sense, I would like to believe that I can prove that I'm right. Back then, 30 years ago, that's very difficult. We had Amanat Negara, MSLS, but good luck, we won't be having this kind of discussion where you can ask questions to MPs and ministers. It wasn't like that. It was very much ampulah. Datuk Sri, you are so good, Datuk Sri, one day when I grow up, I want to be like you. That was the Malaysian society that I grew up. And I don't like that. I came from a working class family. I would like to believe that if I work hard, if I appear smarter than other people, if I'm honest, and if I focus on doing something, I would have a fair chance under Malaysian sun to be as successful as anyone else. Actually, that was the reason why I sort of mistakenly or accidentally joined politics and Reformasi. So with the benefit of hindsight, you should ask politicians, when they say reform, beyond that specifics of this act or that policy, what exactly do you want for this country? And that's extremely important, because from time to time, you would have to deal with different sets of problems and different circumstances. And each circumstance basically comes with a human story, the emotional part, the unintended consequences that may not fit into your idea of reform. Therefore, you can only stay on course if you actually have a very clear path of what exactly is your reform agenda. Some of you have the benefits to spend a few years in the UK. There is one thing that I learned from the British. And I spent my A-levels in a British boarding school, and then I went to university, and I spent 4 years working in London. Whatever you say about the British, at least this is my belief, my experience of about 10 years being in the UK. Whatever you say about the Brits, they have a very deep sense of justice that nobody can argue. I mean, that's why they can take the smallest of an issue and make a mountain out of it. It's not so much about the dollars and cents, it's not so much about the politics. It's the core issue that if something, no matter how small it is, it violates that deeper sense of justice, then it is wrong. And that's something that I find so admirable about the British, that I, to a certain extent, adopted in my political journey, and it guided me, including, I suppose, in the case of myself and Nick, including in our decision to withdraw from the government. Because I think the moment that sense of justice has been violated, and then, it will change a lot of things. You can't justify 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you cannot say that the greater good of this will outweigh that we can transgress this, even though that means that we hurt this sense of justice. So I think a lot of people in this country, we really need to go back and reflect what exactly is this whole reform agenda is all about. What's the end game actually? How is it going to impact society beyond what we have to say for our vested interests? The NGO will say things because they have reason that to say certain things. Politicians will say certain things because we need to win votes and we need to please our constituents. Lobbyists will say certain things, but at the end of the day, how is it will impact society in the long run? That's number one. Number two, and this is I think is a work in progress, and it's ongoing as we speak. Reform must deal with structural issues. Reform cannot be cosmetic. Reform must go deep into tackling the root causes. Otherwise, it's not sustainable, and otherwise, we risk discrediting the very basis of reform. And if anything, that's basically our argument in the government in the last 2.5 years. We have different school of thoughts. There are people who feel that so long as the government is seen to be doing something different, that's reform. That's not true. Otherwise, we end up, successive governments will unveil a series of new initiatives. RMK13 was presented last Friday. And if you're not careful, 4 years down the line, we will have a country that goes through a series of programs or initiatives that government had delivered. Whether or not it's good value for money is a different thing. Whether or not it really resolves the root causes of the problem is a different thing. Because, if we do not make it very clear that only reforms that tackle structural issues and resolve root causes, only those ones are considered reforms. The rest are just basically cosmetics. And as society, you guys perhaps are in different universe altogether, but Malaysia is not in this ballroom, Malaysia is the ones out there. Malaysia is the one on Facebook, on TikTok, on X, on Threads, on YouTube. If you go through how Malaysians generally react to governments or to policy discourse, Malaysians are very easy to please. All it takes is for you to say something new or to show that the government has done this new. And that's good. And therefore, that's why we have allowed successive governments to kick the can down the road. It's not my problem, it's your problem 20 years down the line. Because we have allowed any government, or even in JLCs or in our corporate entities, we have allowed musical chair that each new leadership or administration just come in and unveil new branding. And that's it. He's really good because he picked a different color. Or that's why you see every new prime minister will come up with a new slogan from, from zaman Tan Sri Muhyiddin satu, zaman Dato' Sri Ismail Sabri satu, and now Dato' Sri Anwar Ibrahim satu. Everyone, because that fits into, to me, the misguided view of reform, that so long as you put a skin to it, and then you have a list of new things that you do, never mind all the really difficult things that you need to do. So it's very important for all of you who one day will take over our place to understand that it is not a reform if it doesn't deal with structural issues and root causes. Number 3, and I mentioned it just now, quantum does matter. Impact does matter. It is not enough just to unveil a series of what we will do. Or it is not enough to say that we will take 3 years to study. Impact matters, quantum matters. If anything, if you take too long, or if you don't sprint as fast, it gives the impression that you are not wholehearted about it. What can be done in 2 years, if it is under a reform government, should be done within 1 year. That's how I see it. Only then reform becomes the core focus of the government, and you can shift gears so that the whole country moves away from business as usual. So the quantum does set the tone. If you don't have a clear quantum and a challenging quantum, it's like setting KPI. If you want to create new value, but you set a very low target, and then it's just business as usual, the whole organization will not change. And finally, and I think this is the most important, more than anything else, reform will not happen if you don't have the right people. And by that, I don't just mean the Prime Minister. It is the responsibility of the Prime Minister to make sure that all the major ministries, institutions, all the leverages that we have to use to push for reform, you must put the right people who really believe in reform, who really want to do reform, who will take risks to do reform, and who sees it as his or her life mission to do reform. And with the benefit of hindsight, I think that's where we went quite haywire. Because when this administration took over, I think the government was in two minds. If you change everyone, and then you will be seen as vindictive. And therefore, I think from the beginning, the thinking was that, okay, let's retain as many as possible and bring them on board. And I think there's no right and wrong then. The discussion, there was no right and wrong. You have to balance the two. By now we know, for example, that you do require the right people with the right mindset, with the right tools to really push ahead. And one good example, of course, you know, I mean, the whole country talks about MACC. So the first extension, I think we all swallow it on that basis, that if we were to rock the boat too soon, it might backfire and therefore allow Tan Sri Azam-Baki to stay there. But I think it's very difficult to justify the second extension, the third extension, and so on. And if anything, the Chief Commissioner of MACC represents the credibility of MACC. And if you don't put someone with the credibility, and then we will have a problem, irrespective of what the government of the day sets out to achieve. Hence, that also explains why Nick and I took a different tone when it comes to the judiciary. It was not enough to assure that the government does not intend to meddle with the appointment of judges. Because you can follow every rule there is in the book. You can follow the constitutional requirement, but finally, if you are judged to have put someone who is not worthy of that reform agenda into the judiciary, then everything collapses. And that's why, you know, whatever people say, you know, as backbencher, we have all the time in the world, and then it's not easy to sack us. So I think, you know, we could play our role that way to make sure that reform must come with the right people. Otherwise, everything is diluted. I was shown that I only have 5 more minutes. Okay, so let's get to the bit that perhaps you are more interested about, how you can become ministers in 20 years' time. And how do you fit into the whole thing, you know. You know, in the early days of UKEC, you know what was the selling pitch for people to pay attention to what happens in the country? Some of us feel that perhaps we wanted to spend more time in the UK, work in the UK, and maybe never come back, and so on. You know, I have my reasons to come back, but this is one sales pitch that was actually quite popular. Have you ever heard this about Plato and the inferiors? You see, Plato once said, the price of not taking part in politics is to be governed by your inferiors. And that actually was very effective back then, during my generation, to tell people that you should actually take part in politics. Because otherwise, lo and behold, you know, you think you are smart, you went to the UK, get a good degree, you think that you are far above everyone else. Little did you know, when you come back, more often than not, politics is not your play, and therefore the direction of the country and everything that comes with it is decided by someone else. You know. So I don't know how many people in this room actually have interest in politics. I'll be quite worried if many of you do, you know, because it doesn't pay. And knowing the kind of people who join UKEC, the kind of, you know, environment that you spend your time in the UK, you have your ambition. And then usually your ambition doesn't revolve around cleaning other people's mess. Your ambition revolves around what car do you want to buy, when do you want to get married, what house, when do you want to become CEO, and so on. That's usually quite common among people who get government scholarships, went overseas, and want to come back. This is your biggest challenge. The challenge is that even if you want to do something, and even if you want to change something, you live in a society that promotes comfort zone and one success model. Everything about you is designed around comfort zone. You left school with a good degree. You get a scholarship that bonds you most of the time. You go and get a good degree, and then you are supposed to come back and join a government-linked company most of the time. And most of the big companies in Malaysia that offer a scholarship are GLCs. And then you'll be stuck trying to climb the corporate ladder in the GLC, 7 years, 10 years, unless you bail yourself out. I paid 6 months early so that I could leave. And then therefore, that is your success model. Your success model is that you must do well in school. If there is 30 A's, you need to score 30 A's because it's very competitive to get scholarship. And then you get scholarship, you go overseas, and then you come back and you work. Hopefully one day you can become like Novan and become CEO of CIMB. That's everyone's dream. That is our one success model that has been cultivated, that creates this comfort zone environment. Do you actually think you can change the country if you follow that path? Hence your dilemma. Hence your dilemma. You see, we spend a lot of money sending people for education, giving 95% free education, basically. If you study locally, the public actually pays 95% of the cost of your education. You only pay 5%, So we've created this, right? It's even more so tricky because we take our top brains from SPM and send them and bond them and therefore restrict their path. As I mentioned earlier, Malaysia is not defined by MSLS. Malaysia is not defined by your policy discourse today. Malaysia is what's out there, the struggle out there, the difficulty of the people, and you are most probably not even 1% of the population. You are the small minority in the country, and if you follow that path, most probably the gap between you and the reality on the ground gets bigger and bigger as you grow older. What makes you think that you have the right to talk about Malaysians as a whole? That was the question I asked myself when I was at your age. And therefore, for a few of us who ended up in politics eventually, we had to go through a very difficult path. We had to work 9 to 5, often up to 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, to pursue our career, and then leave work at 9 o'clock and go and do our political work from maybe 9 to 12 every day and during the weekend when we were 23, 24, until we are 50. So you have to ask the question, in order to effect change, you must earn the right and the respect. And you have to roll up your sleeve, go out there, become part of the people and the problem. Only then, I think, you will be able to influence how this country is governed in the future. Otherwise, your opinion, your questions, your diagnosis will only linger in this hall. It doesn't have any impact whatsoever outside. If you get that right from the very beginning, from today, I hope you will go back and reflect and then recalibrate. If you really want to change the country, then you have to recalibrate your model success. We need young people who take more risks. We need young people who basically stake everything in order to run your own company and create something, because GLCs don't allow it. When you go back to your career and then you have to go through this corporate ladder, it's very difficult for you to innovate anything. And by the time you become CEO, most of the time you have to follow what has been set for you for the last 3 decades. It's not easy to steer the ship even 5-10 degrees differently. Only people who took the risk, started on their own, and bear it all, only these people eventually, if they ever make it, actually has an impact in society. So I think, Vincent, do you want to flash more time that I have? So I think I've taken 3 minutes extra. I was asked to stop at 7:07. How long do you want to give for them to fire questions? Because the whole talk was meant so that you reflect and not ask questions. How long do you? 20 minutes, okay. So I pause there. You can ask whatever questions you want to ask. Don't expect nice answers. I don't usually give nice answers. But, you know, I mean, take it with a pinch of salt. Oh, still other people. Ada juga orang nak tanya question. So, all right, I'll pass back to Vincent then. Thank you very much. We shall stop at 7:30.
Thank you, 𝗨𝗧𝗔𝗣𝗧𝗧, for the wonderful speech. Perhaps let me open to the floor. Let's start from the right side. Can you please introduce yourself and with your questions?
Hi, I'm Kayong and I'm an A-level student currently studying in Sunway. So thank you, 𝗨𝗪𝗧𝗧, for the insight. So 𝗨𝗪𝗧𝗧, over the years we've seen several prominent figures who were once central to the Reformasi movement and instrumental in building keadilan leave the party, such as leaders like Allahyarham Tan Sri Datuk Sri Abdul Khalid bin Ibrahim, Asmin Ali, 𝗠𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and others. These individuals played key roles during the party's most critical phases, especially during its early struggles. Today, keadilan faces renewed scrutiny. There's growing public perception of internal challenges, alleged nepotism, and a drift from the reformist ideals that once galvanized the party. Despite the Madani government's emphasis on reform and institutional renewal, many Malaysians continue to express concerns about political interference, selective justice, weak institution, and instability within the ruling coalition. My question is, in light of these realities, how do you see the future of keadilan and the Madani government going into the next general election? And more importantly, do you believe that the Reformasi spirit still live on within keadilan, or has it, as some critics suggest, turned into reformati? Thank you.
Maybe we take a few, you know.
Can we have questions first? Yeah.
Sure, you can go ahead. Yep. Thank you, 𝗨𝗪𝗧𝗧, for the speeches now. I have a question. So you were mentioning that we need to come up with an idea. What is the framework for our reform actually means? Meaning that we have to define that properly before we proceed to the ideas of implementation. So my question is very simple. Why do not you think of that before you got in power? That's it.
Can I have another question?
Another one?
Anybody else?
Assalamualaikum. Right. Hi YB. So basically you've mentioned before that reforms is based on loops and iterations, and we can agree that reforms is also something that must bring something new, and usually novelty will disrupt the status quo, the very thing that made a complacent system and the people within it very fear of the changes. And you also mentioned before that anything that between or like will disrupt the fine line is need to be investigated and all. So what are your thoughts and what do you have to say about, like the changing the status quo and also the fine line within the system? Thank you.
Okay, the first question, reformasi or reformati, and I think it's bound to happen in a political party like PKR that started off as a movement because it was an amalgamation of different groups of people coming together. You have the ex-UMNO, you have the NGOs, you have student leaders, you have the professionals coming together. But I think over the years, the challenge for PKR has always been and will be is how it manages the temptation of power. Because the very basis of PKR is to separate the largest of power from politics. The whole concept is that if you come forward to become a politician, it is a national service. Okay, you get your salary, but beyond that, if you want to make money, go and do something else. Likewise, even if you are very influential in the party, but if you don't fit the need and the structure of the government, a PKR government cannot be seen to be rewarding anyone from the party just because the moment you do that, then this whole nexus of politics, business, reward, largesse, the very basis that PKR opposed against UMNO in the past, and then people cannot tell the difference. That's why you see PKR began to have this huge problem since 2008 when PKR first got power in Selangor. It wasn't too much of a problem prior to 2008 because people did not want positions in PKR. From 2008, you have the state governments of Selangor and Penang, and then from 2018 and 2022. So I think this constant battle between the purists, people who believe that don't go that path, and people who say that for the party to grow, we must be like this. And that's why, therefore, contestation for party leadership becomes very intense. Because there's this feeling that if you are part of the senior leadership of the party, it comes with government's positions, and the government positions allows for governments and public largesse. And that's why you see all this, contestation from time to time. So I think if PKR does not handle this well in the this year, in the next 2 years, or in the future, if I were in your shoes, it's very difficult to tell the difference. Whatever you say about UMNO or PAS or Bersatu for that matter, their selling proposition, unique selling proposition, USP, is actually very unique. They want to defend the Malays. And it does appeal to a large section of the voters. If you look at DAP, whatever DAP says, the USP for DAP is to champion and defend the rights of the non-Malays. It does appeal. So how does a party like PKR position its USP if it's seen to be just like any other party? And then you can't fault the public for thinking like, why bother with PKR? And I think that's my worry about PKR, for donkey years. And we've said enough and very clearly about the danger. And I'm not sentimental about anything, I was brought up not to be sentimental. That's why I only attended UKEC, MSLS 3 or 4 times in my lifetime. Although I spent all my years in the UK building UKEC in the early years. Because people have to move on, and I learned enough that I can't be sentimental. So in that sense, I'm not really sentimental about PKR as a party, but PKR does represent one very important element for our society in the future. It is a middle ground party. It is the most successful multiracial party. It is a party that has built itself as a policy-based party in the future. If PKR goes down, it will drag the public belief and faith in a party that does not want to go into the traditional value propositions, not race, not religion. It is the only party that has been successful not playing race for the last 30 years. Going down, if PKR goes down, that means, the promise that Malaysia will one day move away from race politics is going to get dimmed. Unfortunately, it is out of our hands now. And I think, we can always voice out, but ultimately that's what the leadership of PKR and by extension PH has to reflect now. It's not so much about the largesse and the competition for who gets what within government. It is the future of political offering to the public. And I hope, they take our views sincerely. And otherwise, I don't know what advice I can give to people because, as I said earlier, respect must be earned. We should not vote or follow anything purely by the label. We must follow by the substance. And if PKR has lost that substance, unfortunately, even people like me who spent 25, 26 years in PKR, I'll find it very difficult to justify for other people. The second question about, the clarity of what is reform agenda. That's why I said, with the benefit of hindsight, the formation of government in 2022 was kind of unique because it was a hung parliament. I drafted the series of early principles for BN and other parties to consider. More or less, these are the framework parameters. But of course, when you negotiate for something as extraordinary like that, you'll be left with a lot of general statements. General statements from the Constitution, general statements about the well-being of the people and so on. So obviously, as a general principle, I think we had it. And then from that first document, we then translated into an agreement between all the parties that form unity government. Again, it was just a series of general statements. What we never got to do was to be very specific about the kind of reform. And this is when, if you look at the model, especially in European countries, take Germany, for example. After every election, sometimes they take up to 2 months to negotiate a formation of a coalition government because they really specify every single thing. What is the red lines, what must be there, even to the detail of the kind of deficit, the kind of budget, everything was stretched out. And therefore it was very clear. So I think it was water under the bridge for this government. But I'm hoping that Malaysians and the voters will warm up to the idea that in the future, most probably we should allow post-election coalitions and demand the negotiations to be a lot more detailed. And therefore, parties, whether Bersatu ke, UMNO ke, Parti Syahril ke, one day, when they decide to go into election, and then they end up with 20 seats, and they become kingmakers, so to speak. The public must know that if you form a government and you break some of these covenants, we will punish you severely. These are the covenants that you should not break because we voted for you because of this. If in the next general election and series after that, if Malaysians can warm up to that idea and not rush into forming a government 1 week, 2 weeks, then I think, at least we have a clarity and we can avoid this bitter aftertaste, as if that people have been taken for a ride. You promise one thing, but you deliver another thing. The third question tadi, Zaim tadi tanya, I was trying to wrap my head around it. The question is about, Zaim yang tanya pun dah keluar dah. The question is about, you're not going to burn anything today, are you?
Oh, no. Tak ada bakar-bakar ni. So basically the question is, you've said before that wanted to do reform need a fine line, but also like reform we need to agree akan bring novelty which will disrupt status quo. So what are your thoughts, like what you have to say about trying to disrupt the status quo but at the same time bringing the reform agenda? The very hard, the fine line you were saying. Thank you.
See, that's why I think, it begins with the head. I'm sorry, this sounds it's very sensitive again. But I think any prime minister, when he or she takes over the reign of a government, I think they must be very authentic about the kind of change that they want to do. And that's what I meant all along, about there must be a clarity about the reform agenda, because the civil service, for example, takes cue from the Prime Minister. If the Prime Minister is very clear that these are the status quo that I want to challenge, and then the civil service eventually will have to toe the line. Likewise, the stakeholders outside, if they are very clear about the status quo that the Prime Minister and the government wants to challenge, say for example, the Alibaba culture in our society, then all the stakeholders know that there's going to be a big war on this one. So I better readjust how my view is, Unfortunately, so far, I think we lack that authenticity and distinction between which of the status quo that we really want to challenge, Kalau di sebelah kerajaan Madani is all about the rich versus the poor. It's very big, the rich versus the poor, because which exactly is the rich? And then that's why sekarang ni dia jadi problem, because if you say that this is the rich versus the poor, is a class war, and then the super rich ni, maha kaya ni 2-3 orang, and then your best friends or your officers semua end up having dinner with them, and that's it. It's a problem. So and then we have this problem about high value tax, high value goods tax. The narrative was, this is a class war, the rich versus the poor, and then you reverse. Payah. So you have to be very clear in your administrative span, because you only have 5 years, which status quo you want to dismantle, and focus on that one. And unfortunately, I think, I'm disgruntled, so to speak, because I think the easiest low-hanging fruit that this government could have achieved is in the fight against corruption. You don't need to define that. That's very clear, very easy. Everyone can relate that, But that must begin with putting the right person dekat SPRM. And everything around it must be reformed very quickly. Only then you will be able to build the confidence. And I think it's water under the bridge. We missed that opportunity lah. for Datuk Seri Anwar to redefine the authentic, clear status quo that he wants to challenge. I think it's going to be quite difficult in the remainder of the 2 years. There's still questions? I'm okay. Korang nanti kena halau dengan hotel, aku tak tahu.
We still have 4 minutes, so let's take 2 very concise questions.
Okay, good evening everyone. Since you're the former Minister of Economy, I thought I'd ask questions about the economy. Now, Malaysia can track billions and billions of ringgits of FDIs. We have new master plans, etc. But so long as the majority of Malaysians remain poor, Malaysia is still poor. Are Malaysians too comfortable? And how do we economically challenge the majority of Malaysians? Thank you.
Next question.
Hi, YB. My name is Wan. So you told us to reflect a lot. And I think one of the way to reflect is to think better. So at the very fundamental level of being a reformist, I think if you would help us to give a framework of thinking on how to think better, envision something that is highly audacious to create a Malaysia where change is like a norm for us. So how would you teach us to think better, to be a critical or radical change maker? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Next question.
Kalau just one more. So basically, I've worked in three different social enterprises, and 2 of them I co-founded. And I know that post-Minister Cabinet, you've redirected Ayo Malaysia to social enterprise. So considering that you've been in the ivory towers of government, what insight do you see that has potential with social enterprise, and how can we as the youth join in as well? Yeah. Thank you.
Last question. What would you do when I break that 1 minute left? Are you going to throw me out of the hall? Or?
No.
Zero?
I'll try to keep it very short.
Most probably UKEC has to pay more. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it very short. My question, hi YB, thank you for your time. My question is very similar to the very first question, if you remember, and it's about we've come to a very uncertain time now in Malaysian politics. What do you foresee will happen to the current Pakatan Harapan and PKR after Anwar Ibrahim, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim? What do you foresee will happen? Because, that's all.
Okay, I will try to answer quickly so that UKEC doesn't have to run to CIMB and get extra sponsorship to pay. First question is about the economy, Prof. Williams here. Okay, you see, when you say that all these investments, growth means nothing if the people are poor, it depends to whom you talk to. Because if you look at our national number, actually incidence of absolute poverty is about 4%. It's about 4%. Incidence of abject poverty is about 0.18%. So on paper, Malaysia is doing really well. There's not many poor people in Malaysia. Any government who comes in and out, one day Waf will become Minister of Economy, he will say exactly the same thing. So in terms of where we are as a country in terms of our fight against poverty and so on, I think we've done really well. Unfortunately, we are stuck at the upper middle income category. So we have a society that aspires to be Koreans or Japanese or Europeans. But everything about our economy, the complexity of it, the wage level, the productivity is not there. And it's a ticking time bomb, So, and therefore, and this is the bit where, Malaysians and governments and political parties and economies have been pointing fingers at each other. Whose fault is this? I think government has to bear a lot of responsibilities to push the complexity of the economy. Only when our economy goes into the high gear of value creation, that means that we no longer pasang lah. We actually innovate and create, and then what we sell is no longer plastic. What we sell is basically our brain. Only then can we hire engineers and then do real engineering work. How many of you actually are going back as engineers? Do you know why I decided not to become engineers after coming back from my first summer holiday? I went and see some of my seniors and asked them, what exactly do you do as an engineer in Petronas? And then I realized they are nothing more than paper pushers. They actually don't do the engineering work. They just manage contractors who do the engineering work. They manage the invitation to bid, the spec, they manage the tender, So then I realized, actually, this is not what I want. If I were to graduate as an engineer, I actually want to be doing circuits. Unfortunately, in Malaysia, when you go back to your sponsor and so on, not many of you will actually end up as an engineer. You will become an administrator with an engineering degree. And the reason for that is because there's just not enough jobs. We don't have labs. We don't create all this. When we build expensive plants, we actually use technology from the US, Japan, Korea. They come bulk and build everything with their engineers. We just manage them, you see? So whose fault is that? That's what the government actually has to push more, basically, and it comes in policies, it comes in. So I think once we are able to do that, and that's why, my short time at Ministry of Economy, I really put a lot of focus on wage level. Let's move away from poverty index, incident, and so on. Because if you talk to people, they earn 4,000 to 5,000 ringgit a month, which statistically they are not poor. But if you look at their livelihood, at how they struggle, they consider they are really poor, and they may not be wrong, because they aspire for something else bigger. And then, economic headlines numbers are just headlines numbers. It doesn't mean anything to society. You will end up with 5-6% economic growth, but if the income disparity is very huge in society, eventually it will create chaos. So wage level becomes important. Unfortunately, you cannot force businesses to just pay when it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make business sense. They will go bankrupt doing that. And this is where I think the next 5-year plan and successive governments have to really focus in making sure that our economy's complexity increase in tandem. Because there's no point having PNB 118 when everything else most probably was built by Samsung, I think, and a lot of everything that comes in it was actually built by someone else. You just go in. Actually, all this is quite, a challenge for our economy at this stage. That's why we've been stuck at the upper middle income for the last, 15, 20 years, I think. The second question was on social enterprise, is it? Okay, the second question was on social enterprise. I think you will, to those who are interested, and I think you should be interested, because if you want to do something and you want to impact change and still grow an organization, going forward, most probably, apart from startups, social enterprise is one of the better ways of doing it. But from the national perspective, we cannot afford to tax and spend for the next generation. Your generation is already inheriting a huge debt, because previous generation kicked the can down the road. It's going to be your problem. When you are at the height of your career and form the biggest part of the workforce, you will be at the right smack at the center of an aging nation. the number of workforce is going to get smaller. You have this burden of paying for yourself and paying for your parents. And as people live longer, they require more care than have ever been in our society. You know, long-term care, health care, and so on. You know, so if we are stuck with just two models of public service, either you tax and spend from, you know, publicly provided services, or everything is paid to corporations or private companies, we are going to have this recurring problem of medical inflation, of cost of living, and so on. You know, that's why it's of national importance to create the third sector, which is good, sustainable, operationally sustainable businesses that provides all these basic goods and services, but not done for profit making. Money is being circulated, public can put in, government can put in. Operationally and financially, we should focus to create this third sector, which is basically social enterprises, so that it can balance the market forces, and it can balance the first sector, which is public sector, the second sector, which is the private sector. I mean, it's very nascent. In fact, you know, we put it into RMK 13, and based on the timeline, the government only plans to come up with the first legislation in 2028. We need the legislation for that and so on. I can't remember, the third question was on PKR, is it? Or there's another question. There was 4 questions again. The third question, how to think better. Okay, now. You guys are far smarter than all of us. I don't think what you need is brain, frankly speaking. I think you all are smart, you can figure things out yourself. What you need is heart. It's not brain. So don't ask, you know, there's nothing we can impart to you that can make you think better and so on. But I hope you will become a better citizen, because your challenge is that on the path that you have now, you are on the route to become toxic middle class by the time you are 30. Because this is what will happen, most of you. You will go back, you have a career with your lanyard and tie and so on. You think you're on top of the world. And then, you know, you will chase your promotion and your middle class lifestyle. By 30, only a fraction of you actually achieve what you want. Majority of you are stuck in your corporate rat race with your expensive mortgage and your car and the need to go further and further. And then you don't know where to stop. And once you cross 30, you start thinking everything else is stupid and wrong in this country. Why am I not getting my opportunity? So what you need is heart. What you need to understand, that is not the be and end of everything. You will define what matters to you as a person. And you can only do that by bringing yourself down from the high pedestal. Because, you know, I mentioned about how our society promotes comfort zone. You are in your comfort zone now. Of course, you know, I mean, my generation created 𝗨𝗖𝗔𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗠𝗔. Every now and then, and in fact, I think I was very unpopular then, because I remember when I gave a speech in one of the 𝗨𝗖𝗔𝗣𝗧𝗔. And I was only, I think, about 20, 21, and I told the facilitators, I think, please don't treat this as your summer camp, just so that you feel good about yourself. Because this is not about you, this is about the kids, the poor kids. Unfortunately, you are on that pedestal. You will always look, you know, above. You never look down. You never go down. So take your time, go down and understand, and from there, I think, if it makes you a better person, that you feel more comfortable outside the hall of Nico Hotel, Intercontinental Hotel. You're more comfortable with people, the so-called downtrodden, people who struggle out there. And I think you will figure out what to do. If anything, that's what's missing. It's not brain, it's heart. Yeah? Last question about what will happen to PKR and PH after Anwar Ibrahim. God knows. All I can say is this, you know. Most of the parties in the world that were elected on the basis of bringing reform find it very difficult to stay beyond 1 or 2 terms. They usually got kicked out, and then the very party that they campaigned to replace came back to power. And that's the lesson in Japan with LDP. There's also the lesson in Mexico and many other parts of the world. And that's why it's very important for PH and PKR to continue building its raison d'etre beyond Anwar Ibrahim. You know, people don't like, in PKR or in PH, people don't like when I say it. It doesn't matter who after Anwar Ibrahim. The essence of PKR and PH as a reform government that contrasts, you know, the rest has to be preserved. Because beyond that, then I think it's very difficult to convince the public about why they should stick to PKR and PH. And one final sentence before, Mamat ni dah mangah dah. Dia tengah WhatsApp dengan Intercontinental punya management. I don't think that PKR and PH have managed to retain at least 80 seats every election since 2008. I don't think it's because predominantly or purely because of Anwar Ibrahim. I think it's because Malaysia wants change. Malaysia wants something better. And they feel that Anwar Ibrahim is able to cobble together diverse group of people who can actually govern better and think differently and deliver better. That's my caution to the government after we take over. That if you change it so that everything revolves around Ibrahim, Anwar Ibrahim, is actually dangerous. Because that's not what people voted for in the beginning. People voted for change. They wanted to see active and meaningful contribution of everything. And Anwar Ibrahim was a figurehead. If the public now thinks that Anwar Ibrahim is the B and N of PKR and PH, we are in trouble. And I hope, you know, the leadership of PKR and PH will take it from here and decide how they want to strengthen and plan for the post-Anwar Ibrahim time. Thank you very much. Please send the bill to CIMB.
Thank you, Dato' Sri, for such a wonderful session. And before we go, we have present a TOA for you, that Dato' Sri.